What are the most popular cameras for infrared photography? Let's count down the top infrared cameras from Canon, Fujifilm, Nikon, Olympus, Panasonic, and Sony. Then we'll look at the top cameras for infrared photography across all brands and the most popular camera for each sensor size. These rankings are based on demand for infrared profiles. These profiles only work with specific camera models, giving us insight into popular cameras. Any camera on this list would make an excellent infrared camera. Before we get started, what percentage of these cameras do you think will be DSLRs, and what percentage will be mirrorless? First, let's look at the most popular Canon cameras for infrared photography. We have a couple honorable mentions for Canon: the Canon EOS 5D Mark III and the Canon EOS 5D Mark II. These were close runner-ups behind fifth place, which is the Canon 5D Mark IV. These three DSLRs would make great infrared cameras. Coming in at number 4 is the Canon EOS R6. This 20 megapixel camera has a pixel pitch of 6.56, the largest pixel size on this list for the least diffraction. For more details on that, visit diffraction.cam, that is C-A-M, diffraction.cam. Coming in at number 3 is the Canon EOS RP. This 26 megapixel camera is the most affordable Canon mirrorless camera on this list. At number 2 is the Canon EOS R5. This 45 megapixel camera was released in 2020. And the top Canon camera for infrared photography is the Canon EOS R. This 30 megapixel camera was released in 2018 and is 7 years old. Now let's look at the most popular Fujifilm cameras for infrared photography. Fujifilm makes APS-C and medium format mirrorless cameras. Our honorable mention is the Fujifilm X-T20. This 24 megapixel camera was released in 2017 and has been my workhorse for infrared photography. At number 5 is the X-T3. This 26 megapixel camera was released in 2018. Coming in at number 4 is the Fujifilm X-T4. This 26 megapixel camera added IBIS, a fully tilting screen, and a better battery. At number 3 is the Fujifilm X-T1. This 16 megapixel camera was released in 2014 and is one of 6 cameras on this list to have a 16 megapixel sensor. At number 2 is the X-T5. This 40 megapixel camera is the newest camera in this video and was released in 2022. And the most popular Fujifilm camera for infrared photography is the Fujifilm X-T2. This 24 megapixel camera was released in 2016 and is now 9 years old. Now let's look at the most popular Nikon cameras for infrared photography. Our honorable mention is the only Nikon DSLR on this list, the Nikon D810, which was released in 2014. And number 5 is the Nikon Z7. This 45 megapixel camera was released in 2018. At number 4 is the Z6 Mark II. This 24 megapixel camera was released in 2020. Coming in at number 3 is the Z7 Mark II. This 45 megapixel camera was also released in 2020. The second most popular Nikon camera for infrared photography is the Z5. This 24 megapixel camera released in 2020 is an excellent entry-level Z camera. And the most popular Nikon camera for infrared photography is the Nikon Z6. This 24 megapixel camera was released in 2018 and is now 7 years old. Let's look at the top Olympus cameras for infrared photography. Coming in at number 5 is the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark III. This 20 megapixel camera was released in 2020. Coming in at number 4 is the OM1. This 20 megapixel camera is the newest Olympus on this list. Well, I'm going to call it an Olympus anyway, combining the Olympus and OM system cameras together on one list. Coming in at number 3 is the original EM1. This 16 megapixel camera was released in 2013 and is the oldest Olympus on the list. Coming in at number 2 is the EM5 Mark II. This 16 megapixel camera was released in 2015. And the top Olympus camera is a 9-year-old camera released in 2016. It is the EM1 Mark II. Now let's look at the most popular Panasonic cameras for infrared photography. These are all micro four thirds mirrorless cameras. Coming in at number 5 is the Panasonic Lumix DMC G85. This 16 megapixel camera was released in 2016. Coming in at number 4 is the G3. This 16 megapixel camera is the oldest camera in this video, released in 2011. At number 3 is the DCS5. This 24 megapixel camera is the newest Panasonic on the list, released in 2020. At number 2 is the GX8. This 20 megapixel camera was released in 2015. And the most popular Panasonic camera for infrared photography is the GX85. This 16 megapixel camera was released 9 years ago. Now let's look at the top Sony cameras for infrared photography. An honorable mention on this list is the Sony A7R. This 61 megapixel camera has the most megapixels of any camera on this list. Coming in at number 5 is the Sony A7R Mark II. This camera added IBIS. Up next is a tie for third place. The Sony A7 Mark II, released in 2014, is tied with the original Sony A7, released a year earlier in 2013. Both are 24 megapixel cameras. And we have a tie for first for the most popular Sony camera for infrared photography. The Sony A7 Mark III, a 24 megapixel camera released in 2018, is tied with the Sony A6000. This 11-year-old 24 megapixel camera is the only Sony APS-C camera on the list. Now let's look at the top 10 most popular cameras for infrared photography across all brands. Our honorable mention, just missing the list, is the Fujifilm X-T5. This just missed the top 10 and is newer than any of the top 10 cameras released in 2022. At number 10, we start with a block of Nikon Z cameras. First off, the Nikon Z6 Mark II. Coming in at number 9 is the Nikon Z7 Mark II. At number 8 is the Z5. And finally, at number 7 is the Nikon Z6. At number 6, we have the highest ranking Fujifilm and the second most popular APS-C camera on the list. That is the Fujifilm X-T2. Next up is a tie for fourth place between two Sony cameras. The A7 Mark III, the only Sony full-frame camera in the top 10, and the Sony A6000, the most popular APS-C camera on the list. The third most popular camera for infrared photography is the Canon EOS RP. Coming in at number 2 is the Canon EOS R5. And finally, the most popular camera for infrared photography across all brands is the Canon EOS R. Let's take a look at the most popular camera for infrared photography by sensor size. For micro four thirds, this is the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II. In the APS-C crop sensor size, this is the Sony A6000. The most popular full-frame camera, topping our last list, is the Canon EOS R. And finally, in the medium format, the most popular camera for infrared photography is the Fujifilm GFX 50S. Hopefully this list will give you some ideas for your next infrared camera conversion. How many cameras did you think would be DSLRs versus mirrorless? Only 4 cameras, or about 11% of this list, are DSLRs, while 89% of the cameras are mirrorless. How close was your guess? Let us know in the comments. Also, let us know why your camera is the best camera for infrared photography. If you find these videos helpful on your infrared photography journey, like, subscribe, or comment. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks.